Well, thank you for joining in to this discussion about some really unique enterprises that are underway currently that involve online dispute resolution. I'm going to give you just a little bit of background about where we started out, where have we come from, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Aresty, who's the president and founder of the Internet Bar, to actually do an introduction of Rachel, his colleague, and give us a little bit more structure and framework. But I'll start out by sort of talking about something that Jeff and I have talked about. We've told this story in public many times, and that is that our association started when we got lost walking to dinner in Liverpool many years ago. And the conversation that we were having as we walked around Liverpool basically focused on how do you use technology to bring disadvantaged individuals and disadvantaged groups more into mainstream society. If the assumption is that we're creating this digital world, this internet-based world, how do you bring people who are disadvantaged in the real world, who are even more disadvantaged in the digital world, into a position where they can take advantage of the opportunities that are there? And there have been two things that I've been involved in most closely over the years with Jeff and with IBO. The first is Pistons, which is something we came up with that day when we were walking around Liverpool. And the idea again around Pistons was that we were looking for a way for individuals who were creating things of use that had value to enter a global market and to own and protect their creations, because that's was a huge issue. First of all, getting into the market, and second, once you're in the market, protecting the things that are there and making sure that you can profit from them. And so Pistons was our first major effort. The Invisibles sort of played off of that. The Invisibles was about finding ways to let people who were disadvantaged and disenfranchised both enter the market, but to contribute and participate. And you can't do that unless you exist. So the Invisibles is about how do I take people who don't have a presence, who don't have an identity, and allow them to create an identity and to literally exist in a digital world. And then when they exist, they can participate and contribute in that digital world. Now, this is an online dispute resolution conference. ODR, I think, has two ways that it contributes to the work that IBM is doing. One is as an access to justice portal, sometimes strictly access to literal justice in the justice system. I know that they've been doing work with, or will be doing work with migrants south of the border in the U.S. who are looking for a court date. And so online dispute resolution is a way for people to prepare for that day in court, to prepare to enter the justice system. There are other ways to look at justice as well that don't rely on lawyers. But the other way that online dispute resolution plays a part in what they're doing is as you bring people into a digital world, as you bring them into this environment that we're talking about, it's like Ethan Katz says, when you create this opportunity, you also create the opportunity for conflict. And so online dispute resolution professionals can be a source of dispute resolution for this new online world. And Jeff will talk about more about that in a moment, that we're trying to create. So that's kind of a framework and a background of where we've come from. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff and let him sort of frame things up for Rachel, and then we'll go from there. And like I said, if you have questions, pop them into the chat room or raise your hand, and we'll try to deal with those as we move along as well. So Jeff, why don't you set us up?
Thanks, Dan. And it was a great time in Liverpool as we sort of walked along looking for the now late Jerry Marston. He was about to play for Jerry and the Pacemakers, for those of you who remember, ferry across the Mersey. And it was a big gathering for the online dispute resolution group that we were trying to find where he was playing. But we got lost, and we came up with this idea at that moment in time of peace tones. But the history of that just goes back to my being an international business lawyer. And once the internet came on board, I was all excited at the time that there would be a real effort to harmonize the rules of law for e-commerce, because e-commerce is global. I was told by many of my international law friends at the time, no, that's not what happens. Conflicts of laws is what makes lawyers money. You're not going to find efforts to harmonize rules of law like you think. And they were right, but I stuck at it because I felt that something needed to be done. And what we eventually found was that this is something really that the merchant bankers of old would have figured out, which is where are the markets going to be in the future? And the markets clearly are going to be in the areas of youth, and in particular peripheralized youth, because they're already on the phones, they're already on the cell phones. Most people say they don't have access to it. Well, in my trips overseas to Haiti and to Afghanistan and to Bangladesh and other places, cell phones are everywhere. And cell phones with the satellite connections are the connection to a cloud. And the cloud really is that global space. But who's operating in that cloud? And what rules of law function there? Well, the answer is really there aren't rules of law that function there. There are attempts by all countries to apply their laws extraterritorially to that space, but it doesn't work very well. And of course, with hackers and with cyber terrorists, you can see that they're the ones who are functioning very well in that space because for the most part, to the extent that you begin using the new technologies that are coming out now routinely on the blockchain, they've been using these technologies for a decade already. And they function very well there and they function anonymously. And what you have developing in cyberspace is pretty much a barter environment that is second to none in the world. And that requires each one of us to be truthful to the places where we live and the governments that govern our conduct where we live. And as you can see, that's all changing. China's shutting down. Russia's shutting down. India is shutting down the access to the internet. This environment that we expect, which is global, is not necessarily going to be global much longer. But we've been working in this space through our Pistons Project, which was a music project, pretty much like an American Idol that we ran local contests in physical location in Haiti and in Brazil and in Kenya and in Zambia. And we got finalists that were picked by the community. And then we ran contests on Facebook to select winners. And then we took those winners and we used some of the technology tools to give them access to global markets. But even when we gave our winners in 2010 and 2014 and 2019 access to global markets, it was all based on copyright rules and trademark rules where we were protecting them using the existing laws that exist today to try to give them the best rights that they can. And then all of a sudden, non-fungible tokens popped up in the early part of this year. And now you had a global environment in which you really had an example of groups trying to build a layer of justice in the cloud, where you just had smart contracts and you just had virtual currency. You didn't really have a means of dispute resolution if there were any problems which arose in those kinds of settings that you could go to. And so we took a look at it and tried to figure out where we would go next. For those of you who are familiar with the work that we did in Internet Bar, I've always had a group of youth around me. I do not run the show. The group of youth runs the show. And we've had some incredible executive directors over the course of time who have run the show for me. They've all stayed 3 to 5 years and done a great job. And in the last year with COVID, I was introduced to Rachel Svetanoff, who was building the Global Futurist Initiative with a bunch of youth from all over the world who were really active, all in their 20s and 30s. And they took a look at what we had created, and we just merged our efforts and our activities fairly quickly. And what that has led to is some of the work that we have today. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce Rachel to all of you so she can take you through a presentation of the work that we have, the team that she's built, and where you all can get involved, because there's some pretty exciting opportunities for dispute resolution professionals.
Wonderful. No, thank you so much for the introduction, Jeff, and that overview. I mean, that was very much like laying the map. And the way that I'm going to also present this to just get a frame of mind into work is think of it as you are walking into a village. And with that, I'm going to share my screen and introduce everything that we have been up to. So first, thank you everybody for taking the time to go through this with us and to kind of take a walk. I kind of like think of myself as a tour guide into the internetbar.org Institute and the B1 World Village that we are creating. Just really quick, can everybody see my screen? I just wanted to double check on that. Just quick.
You're good.
Great.
Yes,
Fantastic.
Rachel, I would just mention just at the outset, this is the same presentation that your or version of it that you're presenting to the International Monetary Fund right now as a fellow. Is that right?
Yes. Yes, I have presented a version of this just with a couple slides I rearranged, but yeah, essentially this is the same thing. And to get us now into the B1 World Village, as we see here, like some of the things that I'll be able to describe that kind of overlaid with both what Dan and Jeff talked about was Peace Tones with the Music Center. And the reason why also like these are more blanket terms than just the work that we are doing within this village is that we have the opportunity for other individuals or groups or entities to be able to get involved, which is why like, sure, Peace Tones is just like, you know, one building of the entire like music street. So if we're going to walk through this entire village, there's going to be more than one music center or more than one like justice center where we're going to have courts, multiple groups of mediators, you know, and the dispute resolution community also involved. And we have like this for sale sign to have and welcome like other people to grow this village to really like make it as much almost as a city as its own place in the digital space or cyberspace as much as possible. And to overlay like all the things that internetbar.org Institute has been part of, this is where we start talking about like Global Futurist Initiative and Peace Tones and the projects that we have that have been successful. And to just quickly highlight, you know, these are the brands and everything that we've done. Like it's the same thing, but this is just more or less like the brand collection. So that way, if you were to explore the different websites that we have, this is, you know, like this is what they look like. If we were to look at this on the map, the buildings would have these billboards up at the top. And not to get into the impact like too deeply, but as Jeff has mentioned that, you know, some of our most successful artists from Peace Tones include stars from Nairobi, Kenya, and Haiti, where one of our most successful artists like has over 400,000 followers on Instagram nowadays. So I mean, the work that we have done and what we are continuing to be able to do has that tangible impact attached to it. And the reason why I said that it's not exhaustive is because there's a lot more that I have to record, but this is just the beginning to just share, like even from like the hackathons, there have been over 40 projects presented across 3 countries with over 300 participants focusing on dispute resolution from and on topics from like justice for veterans, domestic violence, poaching in the Amazon rainforest. I mean, it's AI, public defender, and there's been like everything and anything that has been able to have that leverage of the justice system and technology for good. And so with that, we really get into, you know, that for good aspect, you know, why we are focused on governance, you know, why do we need a globally accepted set of standards on the internet? And one of the case points that focuses again, like on the Peace Tones aspect of it is that there are young artists that are being impoverished through digital intermediation, the dominance of media platforms and the hijacking of content to fuel advertising businesses models. So the international and national legal systems have exacerbated these inequalities through these complex licensing arrangements, and it affects the overall ownership of the artist's intellectual property, which is why Peace Tones had that focus of not just like, you know, being able to have the song competition and everything, but, you know, really like how are we allowing the access to justice, in the music industry. So that's where we are building this concept of the justice layer of the internet, and it is applied to more than just the music industry. It could be applied to a variety of ways that previously mentioned with the hackathon, such as poaching in the Amazon rainforest. I mean, there's climate justice, identity justice. I mean, there's all these different concepts that, or should I say, different topics that focus and create this entire justice layer of the digital cyberspace or the internet. And to focus kind of our efforts, our activities into a single framework is what we call the B1 World Village framework, where we're starting at various points, because the whole purpose of this is to meet communities where they are at. And in some impoverished communities, this means like providing electricity. There are over 600 million people in sub-Saharan Africa alone that doesn't have access to electricity. So in ways where we are providing solar power electricity to all the way of building that layer of trusted online communities, there is that piece and that framework where when we are conducting a needs assessment or looking at shaping the space of really community and global development, this is our framework for being able to do that. And there is actually a reason why these colors actually make sense too, is because they are in alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals. So these are the 6 main ones that we cover. However, there are ways to substitute them for one another too. So like with clean energy, you are impacting climate action. So this would be down here. So at the climate action. So I mean, these are even substituted to where they are legitimately applicable to each of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And why we are starting in some ways providing electricity when we are a law or a governance focused organization is because we recognize that to achieve this transformational change requires systems thinking. To be able to help individuals attain access to digital identity or even access to legal aid, in some ways they need internet access or they need electricity. So that's where that systems thinking approach is applied to the communities. And as you see, there's a tiny little purple box here, and that's where the Global Futurist Initiative and the partnership with InternetBar.org Institute took root, is because we are, as Global Futurist Initiative, and putting on my co-founder Global Futurist Initiative hat, we are promoting youth equity. We are promoting the youth involvement and want to be at we want to be a symbol of showing that youth matter as well. And the way that we are doing that is by growing this youth equity movement and leading the charge of, as Jeff said, of being able to take on these initiatives and work together. And that's exactly what it is. It's not just about like youth leading, it's about leveraging like the youth perspective as well. And then it's that intergenerational collaboration that we aim to foster and achieve to be able to make social progress together on. And I'm not going to go through every single box here. This is just our overall theory of change model, where everything that fits in the pyramid of the B1 World Framework is just right here. So this is part of a greater picture into this world. This is if there was the infrastructure of this B1 World Village of its impact and its outcomes, this is what it would be. And from there is taking that dive into our projects and the statuses and the ways for the ODR community to get involved. I think that's I would, yeah, you know what, I'll just briefly highlight first. These are just our projects and our statuses. These are our key collaborators on our projects, of which we definitely welcome more. And for those who don't necessarily want to use their day job skills to try and get involved, these are ways that we would also have people that want to get involved using just new skills if they want to build like new opportunities or if they want to build new skills for opportunities, we'd be happy to provide detailed information on this. But I would like to pass the mic off to Jeff, because the question that I would ask if I was somebody that wants to use my day job dispute resolution skills to get involved, how would I go about doing that?
Well, if you go back one slide, Rachel, so in the first project that's listed, Data is Art and Truth. For those of you who are interested as lawyers or mediators in the aspect of data, which is who we all become pieces of data as we enter the internet. The Data is Art and Truth project really addresses the most singular issue of the lack of trustworthiness on the internet, which is that you can't trust anything on the internet any longer. There isn't an email, a Facebook post, a message that you receive at this point that you can trust in and of itself. You always have to do some second thing. Second factor authentication is what the banks do, and so on and so forth. But then everybody hears about the blockchain and how it's an immutable space, and how that you put data into a blockchain. Leaving aside for a second the environmental concerns, we're addressing them because there are different ways to use the blockchain, and we're using a model called proof of stake, which is the least has the least of the impact on the environment for the work that we're doing. But just leaving that off to the side, think of one issue south of the border. We say data is art and truth. So that we have people who are, let's say, are taking photographs of what is happening in their lives. They become a lens on life, a news reporter of what they're doing. How accurate is that information? Can you trust that information? How do you determine who took that picture? Who owns that video? All those questions are going to be arising, and unless there is a methodology for curating that and establishing the trustworthiness of the data that's being put onto the internet, then we're going to be back in the same place that we are now, even though we may be using new technology. The blockchain by itself still requires input by human beings. Well, the point at which we let that data leave us and it moves online is the point at which we can lie. That's the point at which fraud can be committed, whether it's with respect to a piece of information about your identity itself, or whether it's about something that you've created, but it really isn't your creation. The educators certainly have seen this when they went to online testing. Who's taking the test is the question that's asked. Is somebody else taking the test? How do they verify that? The idea that we're going to have a brand new next internet built on top of a blockchain where each one of us has the ability to enter into a space and put up there what we say is trustworthy needs to have consequences, needs to have a vehicle for there being a determination whether that's trustworthy or not. And so we've created a concept called trusted online communities. Actually, this project came about at the 2006 University of Toledo ODR forum run by Ben Davis, and put together an article for the Law Review at the University of Toledo describing how lawyers and mediators could play a role in establishing the trustworthiness of data that's being submitted online. And when working with the youth, that became a question of, well, it needs to be more than just one blockchain. It needs to be an entire governance system that governs the entire space. And that's a place in which mediators can play roles as cyber notaries, or as Dan and I called it, digital pen pals way back in the day. Think of it south of the border. Actually, this became a fairly easy one, and we're in the midst of putting this together with the immigration community and the solar energy company right now. Thousands of people are south of the border, and they want one thing. They want an asylum hearing date. That's it. The immigration community is stuck on this side of the border because they need to meet one-on-one with each client because that's the way the legal system works. Well, that's never going to work. And everybody knows that. Is there going to be a solution for it? Well, yes, there can be a solution for it. And it is in the solution for it involves technology and setting up a trustworthy means of gathering information about each of the people that wants to have a date. And so we're in the midst of setting that up in the Data as Art and Truth Project. The Pistons Project, another side of this.
Jeff, before you get away from that, I mean, let's talk about that just a little bit more.
Yes.
So what that looks like is that you've got a partnership with this solar energy company that can basically power a mobile station that will allow a migrant who is looking for a day in court and looking for help, getting themselves ready for the day in court, that could be south of the border, that could be a technology bridge between the person who's seeking the assistance and seeking their day in court and a lawyer, let's say in the United States, who's willing to put in time with talking to them. So what you're basically doing is you're creating a bridge that gives you a place that you can talk about whether or not things are valid or whatever. But basically what you're doing in the first instance is creating an infrastructure that allows you to have that conversation at all. Am I got that right?
That's the first step, and that electrical company has already built up mobile vans with their which have been tested in a lot of places already, and working in homes as well as working in mobile units that could be brought south of the border. And then the other aspect of this, which is more of a innovation on the part of the legal community, is that when they were dealing with asylum cases back a few years ago, when there was the presidential order preventing anybody of a certain background from coming into the country, and so a lot of the lawyers began to organize. They used a Henry Ford approach to those asylum cases. It basically eliminated the conflicts rules. They said, look, we're going to take an immigration asylum case and break it down into several parts, and law firms or people with the appropriate skills will work on each one of those parts. And so that you would always be working on, call it part A, this set of work for 100 cases, but you would never go beyond part A. Part B would then be moved to another law firm or another intermediary that would be working with you. So they took a case and split it up so that you could essentially customize the work that needed to be done. In many of those cases, factual determinations of truth, of representations that were being made, needed to be evaluated. That's a role for lawyers. That's a role for mediators that can be played. But yes, the idea would be to create that video bridge and then to be more innovative about how we're intaking the cases so that ultimately the individual is getting a date. And that, of course, is the step one, and there's lots of opportunities there.
You also, as I understand it, you've been doing a development of a project that would be in Cameroon that is slightly different, but might also have a pathway in for mediators and arbitrators who are interested in getting into doing online work in the field of access to justice and basically dispute resolution generally. Give me a little bit of background on the Cameroon project.
So I'll just give a headline on it. The work that we did in the Invisibles was focusing on peripheralized youth who are stateless, do not have food to eat. They are traveling, so they're homeless, and they need to have an opportunity to cross borders, do work, all of which can be done in an online environment. When Rachel and I met, she had been working with people through her Johnson & Johnson background who were dealing in the medical world over in Cameroon and in the water creation world. So they were building trust in these communities that could be displaced. The opportunity, of course, there is, again, the curation of data and playing roles with people who would otherwise have no vehicle either to have access to any form of opportunity they're all going to be traveling with some form of a phone or some form of access to an internet-based environment. What are they going to find there? In most of the countries I've traveled, Facebook is the access to the internet. So regardless of what we're doing here with Facebook in the United States and in other countries, I can tell you in Bangladesh and in Haiti and in Zambia, where I was most recently, Facebook is it. That's how they all connect with each other through the groups and so forth.
Facebook and WhatsApp.
Facebook and WhatsApp, and that's it. And so you're going to be dealing with that community. And of course, it's rife with misinformation. So how are we going to take that community, which is already cell phone and internet access through satellite adept, and get them to act in a trustworthy way? It's going to be by giving them access to opportunity or the ability to cross borders. But the key there is that in every case where we have to establish a trusted relationship with the community to begin with. And that's where when Rachel joined up, she had this relationship with the folks in Cameroon through water creation. And now we're talking to those people who are facing these identity issues as refugees, both internally and externally, are beginning to come up. Maybe Rachel can point that out.
Yeah, no, and that's why I'm actually switching the share screen to this photo is I think to just give it a little bit more of flavor and context is that with my background, I was the program's lead of this crowdfunding platform that Johnson & Johnson hosted called Carrying Crowd. And it was through the interaction of this organization called Walker Water, where they built up this trust with the Pygmy tribe. So this is an indigenous community in Cameroon, their special population. That their habitats are being are shrinking. Their habitats are shrinking, and what this nonprofit did and does is create innovations that stay true to their natural habitats, and so they work with these tribes in a special way. And first, the way that this kind of was approached was that they were looking for electricity, and me, who still has a good relationship with my former boss, he knew about the work that we were proposing with the Texas humanitarian issue as well, and seeing how that would translate here. And that's when during even our first phone call between my former boss supervisor Jeff and myself, during that time, coincidentally, there was also a bit of a legal scuffle as well that almost resulted. It resulted in this fine, but it almost was holding one of their staff members for ransom. So the perceptions of where legal issues matter, like that, they were definitely applied. And that's when I got in touch with one of our other organizations called Unite for Health Foundation, because their founder is from Cameroon. That was, my main go-to. I was like, oh, well, I connected the two nonprofits together based on my prior work. And upon also hearing of the solar power and even the corruption aspects of the way that, we were applying, technology for justice, they were interested in that aspect as well. And they are this organization called Unite for Health Foundation. They were bringing telemedicine and microclinics to different urban and rural communities. And so I'm trying to gather my thoughts here. But with this aspect in that they were also interested in these pieces, and that's how we kind of formulated this small consortium of nonprofits to be able to create this full initiative. And that's where this is exactly what this is. This is the cover letter executive piece here, where we are bridging solar power with this access to to water or to health or to internet, because with the telemedicine, that's where they're also even providing the internet access, and then setting it up to the digital identity piece as well, because what they were really interested in, why they were interested in what we were doing with IBO, with that framework of the invisibles, was because they were talking about how there are internally displaced peoples in Cameroon, and in and cross borders between Nigeria and Cameroon to Nigeria. Everybody's like, trying to get to different places. So that's where that was applied, even from the Texas Humanitarian Project that we were proposing. And I'm also just highlighting quickly, like, this is the solar power mobile units. So if you said to actually, like, have a visual.
Since most of us aren't engineers, solar engineers, most of us are either lawyers or mediators or other kinds of dispute resolution professionals. My fundamental question for you and Jeff is, if I were interested in becoming part of what you're trying to do, A, what could I do? And B, how could I get in touch with you? How could I join what you're doing?
Do you want to take this one on?
Well, clearly, Rachel and her team are organized. You're going to get a chance to come in and give advice to a young group of people. The most important thing and the most exciting role that I've played as president of this organization, which I helped build up for 15 years, and now I'm in the process of turning over the leadership of it to, a youth group, is we get to work together with a very talented group of people. We've got our outreach leader right now is in Glasgow, leading major youth gatherings at the Climate Justice Forum. So we're in some pretty interesting places, just as as an example. But right now,
she's right here.
So this is a young team. So I get to work with Rachel and Maria and Julia and Murillo on a regular basis. This is a crowd that is coming together, working on the next phase of this project. The Be One World project at this very initial stage is about, actually it comes back to a 3-day conference that we ran at the very beginning of the life of Internet Bar. How do you eradicate poverty and build a global legal framework? And the answers that we've been, dealing with over the course of 15 years are coming together once again, as we are all meeting online in places where developing policy forms, answering the question, what does fairness mean to me? What does justice mean for me? And not only are people gathering in these policy forums and debating it within the context of art. So the very first area we're working on is art and music, since that art and music are universal languages. They can be expressed across cultures. And if you actually look at the intellectual property rights that are created by these expressions of art and music, the points of view of what they mean differ from the East and the West, and those discussions need to take place. People need to come up with a point of view of what is property, what is art, that isn't just based on what I might think about it here in the West, because this is what I was taught at my law school. And people are gathering, and of course, the example that we demonstrate in the music and art area is how few people can make any money based on the legal systems that we have in the world today. So if we're going to hold those legal systems out as some way of addressing fairness, we need to ask the question, what is fairness to me? And so there is a contest that's taking place right now called Cast Forwards. It's actually launching right now, and it's being led by the youth group, the Global Futures Initiative, which builds on our peace tones and our Invisibles work. And we're asking people from anywhere, all over the world, whether you're young or whether you are, young in spirit and mind, like hopefully I feel I am, to answer the question, what is justice for me? And to submit some, whether it's a video, whether it's a piece of art, whether it's photography, there's different rules for the contest. But the point of it is to reach out to the world so that people from everywhere can answer the question, what is justice for me? Because it's not just a courthouse and access to institutions. Justice for some people is just being able to live and be able to take care of themselves and have access to opportunity. So we're in this early stages that will ultimately result in the creation of governance documents for a fair trade marketplace. And there are extensive legal documents that are being created right now, not only with respect to determining trustworthiness of how do you approach this question of what is trustworthy and what is not, but also how do you resolve disputes that arise in these areas? And so we're in this real testing phase. So people with technology who have the opportunity to say, look, I have a way to help you communicate across cultures that will help us not only answer questions about what policies should we achieve, but actually as you go from macro to micro into the work itself, you could use some of these technologies to help people resolve disputes. So, we're at that very early stage where a lot of research is being conducted in these areas of what is fairness, but also that's the creation of rights side, and the dispute resolution says, how do we avoid the disputes? How do we keep relationships in a positive way where we catch them at an early stage because we recognize that these areas might be problematic? So all of that advice can be shared with young people on the team who want to take it and incorporate it into the new ways of learning, into the new ways of participating with each other. Young people in their 20s and 30s are not going to be using the legal systems that we have for them today. They just aren't. They're going to be doing something else. We can either help them create it or not by bringing the knowledge that we have. So that's an early answer there, Rachel.
Thank you, Jeff. Well, I think we've got a pretty good background on what you're doing. I'm wondering if there are any questions that anyone has for you guys. Why don't you stop your screen share, Rachel, if you would.
Sure. Yep, I was just about to.
Yeah. Anybody have a question or a comment? If not, we can wrap this up. We will be posting this, and we'll also post a link in the agenda to contact IBO if you're interested in volunteering, if you're interested in getting involved or getting more information. There'll be an easy way for you to do that. So any last words, Jeff or Rachel? Jeff always has a last word.
Well, just thank you all for coming. It's, this started for me in 2005. And I've been working with Dan and with Ethan and with Colin and Leah Wing and all kinds of wonderful people throughout the last 15 years. So I can only say that the real success is attributable to the youth that have, from my point of view, I've been lucky enough to have around me, and many of them. And the crowd that is gathered right now, I can only assure you that if you do get involved with them, you're going to be excited, and you'll be able to bring some real knowledgeable opportunities to the table. We bring in the technology all the time. There's so much technology that is being worked on in our groups right now that relates to virtual currency and virtual payments and smart contracts. And the ODR community constantly is talking about how to be where the future is. And then the conversations move to smart contracts. We take a market-based approach to it. We're building the markets. That's where the dispute resolution work is going to happen. And there'll be existing pain points such as the immigration crisis that we're tackling right now, where we can showcase the work that we're doing. So there's opportunities there, but then there's also this exciting work that we do in creating new markets overseas in Africa and in Jordan. We're working with a partner there who's an Entrepreneur of the Year in the Schwab world. So it's an exciting group. Please stay connected.
Okay, thanks everyone.